none of us had agency experience. The two common paths that I've heard from other agency owners tend to be they either worked at an agency and decided to splinter off and start their own thing as an agency because they were familiar with that world, or they were an independent subject matter expert of some sort and they struck out on their own and they needed a bit of help. So they wound up, oh, maybe they'll bring in this person to help me with this thing and this person to help me with this thing. And then, oops, I have an agency, and it tends to be one of those two paths. We fit more into that latter category of we had no prior experience working at an agency at all. For almost all of us, that was our first job ever. I worked at UT Austin for a year prior to starting Four Kitchens. But other than that, I had no real world work experience. The four original founders all met working together at a college humor publication at the University of Texas at Austin. We really enjoyed working together and we wanted to continue that creative working relationship. So we started a publication in Boston called That Other Paper. And we needed to create a company around That Other Paper to make it a real business. And That Other Paper needed to have a website, of course, because we had no money to publish. We couldn't pay to get it printed. So we were totally broke. Well, we just happened to build this website on this open source platform called Drupal, which was just starting to get really big at the time. And we also didn't know that we had built a really good looking Drupal website. So we started getting these phone calls from people, especially other media companies that were starting to launch on Drupal. And they started asking us like, hey, did you build this website? Can you help me with mine? And we needed to pay the rent. Most of us didn't have jobs. We were trying to make this other thing work. And we said, yeah, sure. What would you pay to have somebody build your website? What were you thinking? And one thing led to another. And very quickly, we were a web agency, not a publishing company. And that kind of surprised a lot of us. It's not really what we intended to set out to do, but it's what we found ourselves doing. And we had to learn how to do everything. I'm having to think back to like 19 years ago. The hardest things to figure out then are the hardest things to figure out now. Things like pricing. How do you win the kind of work that you want to win? How do you be competitive? 19 years ago, when Drupal was a rapidly growing technology that was being widely and quickly adopted by every enterprise, every vertical, right? When open source CMSs were few and far between and very much on the upswing. And it really just came down to like, you're either using like Drupal or WordPress, or you're on some weird proprietary thing that nobody's ever heard of. It was like a buffet of work. It was more about like choosing what kind of work you wanted to do and what you had time for. That was more of the challenge then. Now it's more of a challenge of how do you find the work that you really want to win? Like it's more competitive now, in other words. There are fewer people like banging down the door and it's more about going out and having to find the work. But it's still about remaining competitive and it's still about finding the work that you want to do and trying to be selective and being competitive and understanding how to appropriately price your work and structure your work. I feel like we figured out how to do the work. That was early on, that was really challenging. Like we had to adopt project management methodologies and learn how to structure the work that we were doing in terms of, well, we should do it in phases and we should have a methodology to it. And we should have things like, a discovery phase and, a implementation phase and all of these things. And those things change over time. You iterate on that, and how the industry approaches the work that we do changes a little bit over time. But for for the most part, we've got all that figured out at this point. But back then, that was very new to us. And that industry was very rapidly changing. Things like agile methodologies were very new. Like that was what? You're going to do work in sprints and you're going to have a backlog and you're going to have scrums. And these are all things that we were all learning together as an industry. So those things were new challenges that we were facing then that aren't at all new now, that are like very well established, very well entrenched. Fun challenges. I know this sounds like a dumb example, but it's something that I still think about a lot. And I don't know why. When I think about the little simple pleasures that I got way back in the day, I think about designing the invoice. I put so much time into creating a really clever and fun invoice because we got our first client and the client was like, okay, send me an invoice. A what? Okay. Google, what is an invoice? Look up an invoice template. Oh, this thing looks really boring. We're supposed to be like a creative studio. This is just like a spreadsheet. This looks really boring. If we want to be known as this creative collective, which is the language we were using to describe ourselves at the time, then every single thing we put out into the world needs to reflect that. And I was obsessive about that. And even the invoices needed to be creative in some way. And so I sat down in InDesign and I created this invoice that like was kind of funny. It had this path of a little sort of dotted path. Think of a scene in an Indiana Jones movie where the plane is like flying around the globe and it's leaving like the dashed line. And there was like a question mark at the top with like a circle around it of like, what is this invoice for? And then there was always a message at the invoice that was something like a little note from us. But I would obsess over these little details that probably nobody ever saw. Like somebody in some billing department would look at this thing and just like key in a number in a payment form and send it off. I loved doing things like that because I was essentially trying to create these really great customer experiences. But I was definitely putting my energy in the wrong places. Like I loved doing these little things because they felt like I was accomplishing something, but I wasn't. I was putting all of my energy into these tiny things that very few people would see or even really care about. I mean, all this stuff's automated now. We use like time tracking software and invoices are automatically generated. No humans ever touch any of these things anymore. Like no human eyes ever are like, nobody looks at these things. And one of my business partners at the time did eventually say like, stop doing that. Like you're like, it's very cute, but go do something else. Take all of that energy and point it at something that's going to be a little more fruitful. Now I'm going to therapize myself. I think what was happening was I was getting really obsessed about these little details because there was just an enormous amount of stress that was happening in this business with these big clients that were really intimidating. We were working with major media companies and Ivy League universities and just really intimidating organizations. And we were like in our early to mid 20s. And the feeling of at any point, these organizations could just decide, we're done with you. We don't need you. And in several cases that happened, at some point they're just like, yeah, we don't have the budget anymore, or oh, we're just changing directions or whatever. Sorry, that's business, and that's 60% of our revenue. Okay. There's the imbalance of loyalty, right? That you have when you are a small boutique agency and you are overly reliant on one or two or three clients, when you have what we call a concentration risk with just a few clients, and that well dries up very, very quickly. That's, it is just business, but also it hurts. But that's happened, I don't know, countless times, in the last 19 years. And you learn to mitigate that risk by not taking on concentration risks and trying to be mindful of that and watching, never let a client become more than whatever your risk threshold is, 20% of your revenue, 25% of your revenue, 30% of your revenue, whatever you decide is your level of risk. But I think that like obsessing over these details was sort of like an avoidance behavior, maybe, to not be thinking about other things that maybe I should have been at the time. I think that the biggest thing you should focus on is deciding what kind of client you want and what kind of client and revenue stream is just enough. And I'm using the Seth Godin definition of just enough, as in, don't try to get everything. Don't try to get everyone. You're not trying to create a company that will appeal to everybody all the time. You're trying to create an agency that simply is enough for what you need. And if you focus on that, then you will create an agency that is so highly in demand for exactly the right audience that you will be specialized enough and focused enough that you won't go out of fashion for just the right amount of people and just the right kind of client. So whoever's hearing this, and if this is appealing to you, go dig into Seth Godin and all of the stuff he has to say about that, because like I am going to butcher it and you should just go, that is a very deep rabbit hole. But the point is, focus on finding the right kinds of clients and deciding what your like zone is, what's enough and what's too much, and fill that space. Don't try to do everything, and don't focus on the things that are too small and like insignificant. And another big piece of advice that I find myself giving a lot to agencies of all sizes, because it doesn't matter, quote, big you are, but I think it has more to do with level of experience, is knowing when to sever ties with a client. I hate it. You could say fire a client, but like that sounds like they've done something wrong, and they don't have to have done something wrong. They could be doing everything right, and it's still time to go. And that may be that they aren't the kind of vertical that you want to serve anymore, or they aren't the right size anymore, or whatever the reason. A great example is, and I've told him this, so this won't be a surprise, but we work with a podcast and video production company that I'm not taking credit. He has given me credit for this, so I'm quoting him. He started this agency based on the freelancing work that we convinced him to do. So he has given us credit with him starting his own agency, which is very flattering, but really he's done all the work, right? So he should be taking all the credit. But he has gone off in the intervening years and developed a specialty in working with personal finance advisors. And he's very good at that. We are the only client, we're a web agency, we're the only client in his portfolio that doesn't fit his niche. And we just operate completely differently from the rest of his clients. And he keeps saying, oh, I work with all these other kind of clients, and I promise myself I'm only going to work with all of them and you. Well, why? Because I love you guys, and you got me into this, and I'm loyal to you and all of these things. And I'm like, no, dude, you need to fire us. Like you really need to get rid of us. Like we don't fit your portfolio anymore. And even I, as the client, am starting to feel the strain of that. I can feel like when I go in and we do recordings and he's giving us advice, the advice is starting to not make sense as much anymore. And I can feel that he's like having to churn about like, well, let's see, all this stuff is working for them. Oh, but I don't really know how to make it work for you because you're so different from everybody else. Or like the scheduling stuff doesn't work because we do things in such different ways and our budgets don't match because they have so much more money than we do and we can't spend as much as the rest of his clients. And so like the products and the pricing don't work. Just like cut us loose, man. Like at some point we're going to have to fire him because we're not going to get the level of service that we need because he's too busy servicing these clients that fly him around on private jets to go film their speaking engagements. And here we are we're paying him a tenth of what his other clients pay him. Like it just doesn't make sense anymore. So another piece of advice would be you will outgrow the clients that got you there. There's this great saying, I don't know who said it. It's not mine, but it's something I think about a lot, which is what got you here won't get you there. I think that's probably like good to great or something. It's in one of those business books. So at some point, you're going to go through these cycles of your business is going to change. The types of clients you work with are going to change. Your life is going to change. Your personality is going to change. And you're just going to have to cycle through some things. And you're actually going to be doing these people a favor by letting them loose. Your loyalty will blind you. Higher ed is our market. Well, that was a long road to arrive at that. And we went through a lot of cycles. Our first iteration as a company was Drupal. We found Drupal. It was technology based. Like we will do anything Drupal, right? Drupal was this big market. You got Drupal, we do Drupal. Drupal. And then that started to change a little bit because a lot of companies showed up. A lot of people were doing Drupal. And then Drupal leveled off a little bit. And that wasn't really much of a differentiator anymore. And then, so we had to start to specialize and we became a media company. We did Drupal and media and also higher education and a little bit of nonprofits because that's the portfolio that we had built up to that point. And we knew media well because we started as a publishing company. So we had that background and we could say that we did higher education really well because I used to work in higher education. Half the people at the company used to work in higher education. And nonprofits, like, well, we'd always worked with nonprofits. So that was the portfolio that we had. And that was like the middle period of Four Kitchens that was just a messaging mess. It was like Drupal and a bunch of verticals and like, I don't know, we just have this big portfolio that's just a big pile of stuff. And like, oh, what do you do? Yeah, we could do that. What do you do? Maybe not. Yeah, but that looks good. It just didn't make sense. And we coasted on that for a really long time. Too long. It got us in trouble. And we waited too long to commit to a differentiated stance. And so when we did a big rebrand, when we rethought everything except our name and our primary color green, like the logo changed, our messaging changed, everything. We made a big shift to say, all right, we work with mission-driven organizations. And the reason behind that was we had recently acquired a company called Advomatic that had a large nonprofit portfolio. And we were in the works of acquiring an agency in Costa Rica to expand our talent pool into Costa Rica. And they had a strong, like, mission-driven ethos. Also, Drupal is open source. That's built into what we do. That's a whole vibe. Now, the mistake that we made, or maybe what we didn't fully understand, is we thought that by saying mission-driven, we were building a tent that included open source and higher ed. We thought that by saying mission-driven, we were including both of those. We were wrong. Higher ed does not consider itself to be included in the messaging mission-driven. And that is something that we learned the hard way. Higher ed considers itself to be a different thing. They just don't, like, mission-driven is not a phrase that they identify with. Higher education identifies with education. And education and mission driven are like, cool, that's great if they coexist. Like, yeah, there's like they're cousins, but they're not the same. They're not circles in event. They're not overlapping circles in event. So about a year after that, we realized, oops, that was a little bit of a slip up in our messaging. Let's take a really like sober look at our portfolio and what we want to do and what's real about our client base. The vast majority of our revenue, higher ed. So we decided that we have to it's been a year. Let's rethink our messaging. We did this whole big rebrand. It's time to just look at it with fresh eyes. We dropped the mission driven thing and we replaced it with very clear higher education. So if you go to the homepage on our website, it's totally clear that what we do is, and I'll read it to you, AI content management and web platforms for higher ed. That's what we do. Now, we still work with nonprofits. We still work with a couple of media companies. We still work with a couple of corporations. But higher ed is really what we do. They're like 90% of our revenue. I think that one of the things that we've done really well is create a really great culture. And that has been very intentional. One of the things that we've paid, I think it may be true that we have paid more attention to our culture and the well-being of our team than anything else at the company, sometimes to a fault. And there have been multiple times in our history when we should have downsized or downsized sooner, and we didn't. And sometimes we got lucky and we were able to make it through that. Most of the time we didn't. And we wound up having to let go of people anyway. Or worse, we wound up having to let go of more people because we didn't make that decision sooner. It is a fact of agency life that this will happen at some point. It's just a matter of when. And it is, in my experience, almost all agencies make the mistake of waiting too long. I can't count the number of times we have made that mistake. Like, I have lost count. Somehow we have been able to make it through that. Sometimes I wonder how, but we have been able to make it through that. And it's one of those things that's hard to explain to somebody who's on the team as opposed to like on the leadership team. The leadership team understands this. Like it's when you understand the numbers and you understand the difficult choices, it's like a different perspective on the business than when you're working in the business as an individual contributor. And this is where there is always a fundamental tension within a business between like leadership and everybody else. And I understand why that exists. And I understand why sometimes that can manifest as like us versus them, and this like sometimes a feeling of distrust and disconnection and all of that. But I can't speak for like the majority of companies, but at the smaller a company is, the more likely I think it is that the leadership team is really thinking, like it really, really does care, like is thinking really hard and is really agonizing over these decisions because everybody knows each other. Nobody wants to make these decisions. And sometimes, maybe most of the time, making the decision to not downsize the team is the wrong decision. And that sounds so strange, but it is just Like, look at the numbers. Like, it's just true. And it's a gamble. Like, you're gambling. Like, it's almost literally gambling. We have this amount of money. Will it be enough? Will we get more? I don't know. Maybe. Let's bet on it and see. Your question was, how did we last 19 years? I think we care a lot about our team, perhaps to a fault. Honestly, I think most of the reason is we're lucky. I think we're lucky. I think that despite ourselves and making bad decisions, who is it that said luck is when preparation meets opportunity? Okay, so when I say luck, that's what I mean. I don't mean dumb luck. I don't mean luck like, hey, whoa, I can't believe we made payroll. What? Like, hey, look at that. That was just random. I don't mean random. I mean luck in the sense of preparation meets opportunity. So we spend a lot of time trying to be prepared and learning and getting ready for different scenarios and things that could happen, good or bad. And then opportunities came along, good opportunities and bad opportunities. And sometimes we met them and sometimes we missed them. And when we met them with preparedness, that was luck. And it was that kind of luck that has gotten us through 19 years of being in business. So I guess then my advice would be, how do we get through 19? How did we say in business 19 years? Preparation. And there are ways to build preparation into your business. There are systems you can employ. We are very systems oriented. There was a time, you asked earlier, what would be my advice for early agency owners? And there was something that was like itching at the back of my head. Like there's something I'm missing. There's something, and I'm remembering what it is now. Early on, I had this attitude that like, we're going to start a business and we're going to do it differently than everybody else. Like everybody's doing it wrong. We're going to do it right. And it was this punk rock attitude of like, we're not going to be corporate, and any advice that I hear, we're going to, they don't know what they're doing. We're going to figure it out. Well, the more time that goes on, the more I realize that like everything that's being done in the world, for the most part, it's like, is being done for a reason. And we should decide if we like the reason or not. It's not that these things are being done for no reason at all. They are being done for a reason, and now we just decide, do we like that reason? And then we choose to adopt that thing based on whether or not we like the reason. But we shouldn't just reject it because it exists. So, for example, I talked about how like we adopted agile methodologies for delivering project work. We very easily in the beginning could have said like, agile sounds dumb. That's a tool of the man. We're going to come up with a better way to do projects. And I knew all kinds of agencies back then that were like, we don't want to do that. We came up with our own kind of project management methodology. Where are they now? Who now has rewritten the book on project management? Tell me who. No, everybody does this. Why? Because it works, right? Just adopt the thing that works. If for no other reason, then that's what the client expects to have happen, right? So with that in mind, at some point I stopped trying to like reinvent the wheel of running a business, and I started listening to how people were doing it and reading the books on it to at least understand, like, maybe there's something to this. And we eventually, 8 years ago, adopted something called EOS, which is a way of running a business. Okay, you know what it is. All right, so we're an EOS shop. And that is a type of preparation, right? That's just one of many ways that you can create preparation in a business in order to meet opportunity, right? So what does EOS do for you? One of the many things that it does for you is it forces you to document your process in your company. So if something happens to somebody, you have it written down. It's so simple. It's just like write it down and put it in a place so that somebody else can read it in case somebody else needs to do it. It's just like, it's not magic, it's just very, very simple. So it's ways like that that you can create, that you can like engender preparation in your business. And that leads you to ultimately opportunity. And then those two things combined lead you to luck. But it has been an enormous struggle. It kind of sucks the life out of you, if I'm being honest. There have been a couple of very practical things that have allowed us to stay in business over the past few years. These are not early agency things. So it sounds like a lot of your questions have been aimed at early stage agencies. So these will be later agency stage pieces of advice, for what it's worth. There is a lot of power and opportunity in merger and acquisition. And that is something that I never thought would be possible for us. I had always thought about acquiring other agencies. Like, that's a fantasy. Like, I don't have money for that. Like, I still don't. You can still do it. Like, it is still possible. There are creative ways to make it happen. And we had an opportunity to acquire an agency called Advomatic, and we were able to come up with a way to make it happen that didn't require much money at all up front. And what it allowed us to do was bring in a small but very qualified team and a very impressive portfolio that complemented our existing portfolio very nicely. And it was exactly that portfolio that has gotten us through the past several years. If it wasn't for that portfolio, I really don't know where we would be right now, honestly. And the second thing that we did, acquiring Manatee in Costa Rica, allowed us to dramatically lower our cost of labor by immediately acquiring an engineering team in Costa Rica. So we have a legal entity in Costa Rica, Four Kitchens SRL, that Four Kitchens LLC owns. So there's a company in Costa Rica that employs several engineers in Costa Rica. And that's another thing that I thought was like, a company in another country? Like, that doesn't seem possible at all. That's also like, what? It's doable. It is doable. There are whole systems in place designed to facilitate companies in a country that want to start a company in another country. And it's not as expensive as you think it is. And you save a lot of money. And I got that idea because I was talking with an agency owner elsewhere who was talking about their business model where they have all of their engineers in Romania. And it was at a time, this was in 2022, when wages were out of control in the US because all of the big tech companies were headhunting from agencies and offering crazy compensation packages that agencies could not possibly match. Like Facebook and Apple and all these places were just like robbing people from agencies. And so we had to look outside the US, and this is a way to do it. And if it wasn't for that, I don't think we could have remained competitive in terms of rates and wages. That's not something that an early stage agency can do, but mid to later stage, it's surprisingly accessible once you dig into it. But it's the kind of thing that if the person who owned Advomatic at the time had not called me up because we were friends and said, "Hey, I'm retiring. Have you ever thought about maybe buying an agency?" And my first reaction, of course, is, "I can't afford that." She was like, "Well, maybe you can. Let me tell you how." I never would have thought of it. I thought it was outside of my reach, but it can be. Well, Yeah, the market is really tough right now. There is so much more competition right now. And in our specific world of like higher ed and primarily like open source CMSs in higher ed, so like WordPress and Drupal, there is not only more competition, but there is much more competition because I'll just speak for Drupal in particular. The Drupal market is shrinking in all verticals except higher ed, government, healthcare, and nonprofits. Drupal is either sustaining or growing in those four markets, but is shrinking everywhere else. So where it used to be really big in media and travel and tourism and those kinds of sectors, it's going away. So the agencies that used to serve those verticals that are specialists in Drupal are now retreating from those, and they're like, where's their Drupal work? Well, now they're going to higher ed, government, nonprofit, healthcare. We've always been in two of those four for 19 years. And now all these other agencies are showing up there that have never been there, right? And they're competing with us in a space where we've always been, but they're showing up. Now, it's a free market. They're welcome to do that. The second way where it's getting more competitive is the budgets are shrinking. So this is like a macroeconomic thing, right? Just there's less money to spend on websites in general. Maybe that's temporary. Maybe that's not. I don't know. We'll find out. Clients are taking longer to make decisions. So their budget cycles are being stretched out. They're taking longer to make decisions because they don't know if their money's going to come through. They're told, yeah, you'll have X amount of money to spend this year. But then because of things that are happening at the US government level or just worries about the government or worries about the economy, they've decided, well, let's maybe not spend that just yet. Let's hold off a month. Let's hold off 3 months. Let's hold off 6 months. Let's wait and see what happens, right? So a project that was supposed to start in July, well, maybe that'll start in October. Maybe that'll start in January. We'll see. So that's starting to happen. And that's affecting every stage of the sales cycle. That's affecting when RFPs go out. That's affecting when RFPs are being decided. That's affecting start dates once you're awarded the work. We've had projects get canceled at every stage of the sales process. We've had RFPs get pulled. We've submitted proposals and then we've been told this project's been canceled. We've won projects and been told this project's been canceled. So that's happening at every stage. And that's been happening for a couple of years now. It's not just recent. It's not just like the administration, though that's a huge part of it. That's the majority of it, but it was happening even before them. So those are just a few of the reasons why it's changed and why it's a challenge right now. So that's the context. That's the background of how difficult it is right now. So how are we getting them? Content marketing is a big part of what we do. That's the majority of what we do. And you happen to catch me at a time when I'm extra frustrated about that because our biggest client is a university, so I won't name them, but our biggest client won't really work with us on content marketing because one of their policies is to not endorse vendors. They say, well, you have to remove all mentions of the name of the university and links to the website. Well, then what do? We publish a launch announcement that says we launched a university website. It does this and this. Without a link to it, and we can't say who it is. What's the point of that? Anyway, that's the conversation I was having earlier this morning. Word of mouth is a big deal still. And responding to RFPs, that will not keep us in business. We cannot stay afloat by responding to competitive RFPs. That is industry-wide. It is extremely labor intensive to respond to those things. And you get like I don't know, less than 10% success rate. So you're spending 40 hours on an RFP and you have a less than 10% chance of winning it. Come on. So the best way to win work is a warm introduction from an existing client or somebody who knows and trusts you, right? That's the best thing to do. This year, we have created a full-time account manager role to try to enhance inside sales. So building relationships with existing clients to sell more work to existing clients and to try to expand our relationships within an existing entity. It's basically like growing the pie within an existing relationship. So that's a way to try to expand the sales funnel in a friendly, warm way while trying to avoid the RFP cycle, or to have an inside track on the RFP cycle. Because RFPs, if you know somebody in an RFP situation, if you're already friendly with them, that significantly increases your chance of winning. But if it's a cold RFP and you just pulled it off of a shelf somewhere, you went to a website and saw an RFP listing and you downloaded it and you filled it out and sent it in, like, well, good luck. These are the things that we're trying to do. The other thing I'll add is that more than 50% of our revenue is recurring. So that's like subscription-based support, like website support, or what we call staff augmentation, which is essentially like it's like a strategic version of support where we have a virtual web team. We have dedicated people who work alongside our clients' web teams doing really high level stuff, more than just support and maintenance. So those two things combined are about 55% of our revenue at this point. So the other 45% is project based. So in a given year, we only need to sell 45% of our revenue. That's the target. The other 55% is theoretically already taken care of. We recognized that we had sustained need for a full-time, it was a developer, that we had enough work that we had to have somebody full-time on staff. We had tried to get by with one or two contractors, and they really did not work out because we had no eye for hiring contractors at the time. We were in our 20s. We had no idea what we were doing. I think like the first thing we tried to do was go to one of those websites where you could like hire some random person by the hour. We tried to do that a couple times. That failed miserably. Then we tried to hire people that were friends of ours or friends of friends, and that of course didn't work out. And then we just realized like we need an actual professional with real world experience, and we need to not try to mess around with like contractors and just like, oh, I know somebody. But, that model's kind of changed a little bit in this new economy. We really don't have much of an appetite to hire full time right now. We have lots of everybody on our team. When we talk about our like headcount size, we're only referring to full-time people. We are very hesitant to hire full time at this point. The next full-time hire that we make, we are going to be absolutely certain that it is a sustained, permanent need, and that we are not hiring in any way aspirationally. That used to be how we were. We were like, we had this sort of growth mindset of like, oh, like if we hire somebody, the work will come. That's how we always treated it. We're not going to do that anymore. We can't do that anymore.
Yeah.